It's taken me a lot of time to research for this next video, but then again, Ralph's neo-reactionary ideology was designed to be that way. It's an exclusive set of ideas made by geeks for geeks. Neo-reactionary writing is often long-winded and far too convoluted to the point it's boringly unreadable, intentionally produced that way as to not attract the wrong crowd. Neo-reactionaries want to create a coalition of the middle classes and elites, with the founder of Ralph's ideology, Mencius Moldbug, labelling them the civilized classes. Taken from his blog, Unqualified Reservations, which I can quote from since he still agrees with all the ideas within it.
You know, as I was writing this blog, of course, I'm thinking at the same time, and so some of my kinds of perspectives, I mean, I don't disagree with these ideas at all, I just emphasize them a little differently.
If this coalition of the middle and upper classes, the civilized classes, can be formed, victory is certain, regardless of the numbers of the underclass. When the civilized classes are united, an underclass population of any size is not a political problem, but a security problem, and not a difficult one in this day and age. If the civilized coalition is outvoted, it can simply bid directly for the loyalty of the security forces, a contest it will always win. Ralph has gone to a lot of effort to distract us all from his true ideology as he infiltrates nationalist movements. This video will show what a neo-reactionary world might look like and how Ralph aims to achieve that vision. It will also touch on how neo-reactionary ideas have already infiltrated our governmental structures and why the working classes of all colours, religions and cultures will need to unite in order to combat this ideology. My YouTube channel name has seemingly turned out to be a bit of a foreshadow. Fascists, beware of the neo-reactionaries infiltrating your movements. You don't ever hear Ralph talking about what a neo-reactionary world would look like. He spends all his time LARPing as a Nazi. He doesn't want anyone to know what a neo-reactionary is. The strategy is simple, and it describes Ralph all over. A lawyer with a weak case often feels the temptation to try to inundate the jury with a vast amount of detail. The strategy is essentially to demand that the reader either agree or do the work of assembling the same detail into a counter-narrative. Well guys, this uncivilized working class serf has accepted your challenge. I've done and will continue to do the work. However, Ralph's intentions aren't to convince like the lawyer. They are to distract from his real ideology. Ralph is playing a dangerous game LARPing as a nationalist.
I'm not a nationalist, so yeah, I'm supporting nationalists.
Ralph is a neo-reactionary, a term he's not afraid to throw around, but a phrase that not many people would be able to explain. So what exactly is it? To start, I can't agree more with this statement. At first glance, it appears little more than a fever swamp of feudal misogynists, racist programmers, and fascist teenage dungeon masters, gathering on subreddits to await the collapse of Western civilization. But I'm not one for first glances, so here's Ralph in his own words.
I'm a neo-reactionary absolutist. I believe in a absolute world order, organized a particular way.
Believe it or not, I cannot find Ralph going into any more detail about what particular way his version of a neo-reactionary world would be organized. I know how Ralph likes to advocate for primary sources, so let's see what the architect of the neo-reactionary ideology, otherwise known as NRX, Dark Enlightenment, and originally called formalism, here's Curtis Yarvin, or otherwise known as Mencius Moldbug, and what he has to say about the particular way society might be organized. He calls it patchwork. The basic idea of patchwork is that, as the crappy governments we inherited from history are smashed, they should be replaced by a global spiderweb of tens, even hundreds of thousands of sovereign and independent mini-countries, each governed by its own joint stock corporation without regard to the residents' opinions. If residents don't like their government, they can and should move. Simply put, Neoreactionaries believe that democracies have been proven to be inefficient ways to organize society due to power being shared between multiple groups. One conclusion of formalism is that democracy is, as most writers before the 19th century agreed, an ineffective and destructive system of government. The concept of democracy without politics makes no sense at all, and as we've seen, politics and war are a continuum. Democratic politics is best understood as a sort of symbolic violence, like deciding who wins the battle by how many troops they brought. Neoreactionary thinking is a solution to this premise. The ideology aims to organize society into mini city-states owned by corporations. The shareholders would be made up of the owners and elites in society. Each new corporation would have a clearly defined mission statement, much like businesses do, and unlike how our current nation-state democratic structures don't.
When you're looking at a government is a corporation that owns a country. It just is. It's the same thing. It sort of has this really strange governance structure. If you can imagine like a corporation governed the way the United States is governed. And, one of the things that's most remarkable about the way people think about, politics and democracy today is, probably most people here got here in a car. Did you get here in a car? Well, who built that car? I'm like, well, there's a very simple answer. That car was built by a monarchy. Because it was built by a corporation with a CEO who is essentially in absolute control of that organization, yet also accountable. I'll get to that in a second. But, you drive a car. It was built by a monarchy. You eat at a restaurant. It's a monarchy. Anyone ever seen Ramsay's Kitchen Nightmares? Amazing show. It's not about cooking. It's about management. It's about power and about government. Like that, once you start seeing that equivalence, you're like, okay, I got here in a car built by a monarchy. I ate at a restaurant built by a monarchy. I stayed at a hotel run by a monarchy. You could even get, anyone will be like, oh yeah, a benevolent dictatorship is the best, form of government. But how do you make sure it stays benevolent? As though this is like a question that can't be answered. And I'm like, no, actually, I think that's a very interesting question. Maybe it does have an answer. And so, the concept of...
And the answer is to make them compete?
The answer is, I would say as generally as possible. If you look at what, your car, your restaurant and, Elizabethan England have in common, they are all what I would call accountable monarchies. And so,
Since Moldbug is comparing corporations of today with the monarchies of the past, let's have a look at the living conditions during the Elizabethan era, taken from encyclopedia.com. London's population was divided. It included a small but powerful population of wealthy nobles, a prospering middle class, and a large and impoverished lower class, living in miserable conditions. In the filthy crowded neighbourhoods of the poor, raw sewage ran through the streets. Disease and crime were widespread. Labourers who come to London from the country frequently failed to find jobs. Moldbug kept repeating that CEOs and monarchs are accountable, but the problem is they aren't accountable to their workers or population, and when that's the case, it's only the workers and the most vulnerable that suffer. So what's the neoreactionary grand plan? To reformalise, therefore we need to figure out who has actual power in the US and assign shares in such a way as to reproduce this distribution as closely as possible. It's this next paragraph that exposes Ralph's true intentions, why he's not a nationalist. He's a wolf in sheep's clothing. He wants to hand full authoritarian sovereignty over to the already elite, where the shareholders and CEO would then be able to run their city-states as they please. All laws could be scrapped instantly. All this fails to answer the question, are nation-states such as the US even useful? If you reformalise the US, the question would be left to its shareholders. Perhaps cities work the best when they're independently owned and operated. If so, they should probably be spun off as separate corporations. So if we had a neo-reactionary reboot tomorrow, who would take shares? Well, let's take a look at the constituency of West Berkshire as an example. It has 30 landowners owning nearly half the county. This map gives you a feel of how these super cities could be divided up. It's these landowners who would become shareholders in the new corporation set up to control their territory. Let's take a look at our potential and yet hopefully benevolent overlords. The largest stakeholder would be sitting MP for Newbury, Richard Bannon, who back in 2013 acted out all authoritarian when he was Minister for the Natural Environment, Water and Rural Affairs. The result is that Richard Bannon, the minister in question, is so enmeshed in potential conflicts of interest that were he to recuse himself from all the issues in which he has a personal stake, he would have nothing to do but order the departmental paperclips. Then we have the Yattenden estate, owned by Baron Edward Elief. He owns several media titles too, so he'll be in for lots more shares. The point is, approximately 69% of our land is owned by 0.6% of the country. Get the picture yet? So Moldbug points to city-states like Hong Kong and Dubai as examples how easy it is to keep this kind of political structure peaceful and free from any risk of political violence. But I guess Moldbug's foresight isn't as strong as his notoriety. As Dubai in particular shows, a government, like any corporation, can deliver excellent customer service without either owning or being owned by its customers. Most of Dubai's residents are not even citizens. If Sheikh Al Maktoum has a cunning plan to seize them all, chain them, and make them work in the salt mines, he's doing it in a very devious way. I guess when you're selling pills, you gotta at least deceive by omission. Just like Morpheus did initially to Neo. But this whitewashed view is no surprise when Moldbug wrote a few thousand words defending his reactionary and literary hero, Thomas Carlyle, and his view on slavery. Moreover, just because the relationship of slavery or serfdom is personal by default, does not imply that it cannot be made impersonal, like the relationship of subject to government. If the client is not one of Aristotle's natural slaves, has an IQ over 90, is an adult, and can provide his or her own personal guidance, the subject-government relationship may be a better fit. The master may maximize his economic benefit by simply allowing the slave to negotiate his own employment and living arrangements, and taxing him. Thus, the parallel re-emerges. So in our society, almost 1 in 4 people have an IQ below 90. So if we're taking Moldbug's suggestion at face value, that will include at least some of your own family and friends. We thus observe slavery not as a perversion, but as a natural relationship like marriage. Of course, like marriage, slavery is not without its abuses. When we think of the word slavery, we think of these abuses. Thus, by defining the word as intrinsically abusive, like marriages in which one party beats the other, we can conveniently define away all the instances of slavery in which the relationship is functional. Carlyle is in fact ready to be as indignant as anyone over these abuses. He reasons, since slavery is a natural human relationship, this bond will exist regardless of whether you abolish the word. And it does, if only in broken and surreptitious forms. However, if you are a genuine humanitarian, and your interest is in abolishing the abuses, the best way to do so is to abolish the abuses. So, for example, Carlyle proposes reforms such as stronger supervision of slave owners, a standard price by which slaves can buy their freedom, etc., etc. In his blog, Moldbug highlights the apathy of a population as an acceptance of tyranny, and in this speech, he actively calls for his audience to become more apathetic, while questioning whether they even deserve power.
If you believe it's a moral necessity, why? Why do people have a right to political power? Again, I would say difficult questions. So here's my answer to this. Basically, you need to just, if you actually want to change your political system, you have to resign from it. You have to quit, you have to stop voting, you have to say, I don't believe in any of this stuff. And you have no right to political power. Why should anyone have any right to political power? You know, the reality of your relationship with your government is you're governed by it. You have no power over it. And moreover, actually, you have no real experience or ability in how to run a government. you don't know anything about running a government. You know only about watching this, reality show called CNN. And if you look at the reality of Washington, first of all, the people in Washington are not doing a great job of running a government, even though they do it every day. And secondly, Americans have no idea what goes on in Washington. I mean, the reality of this political system, is that it's just completely disconnected from the reality of government, and people working in government perceive little ripples coming down from your election, and that's all. So the only thing that you're in a position to demand is basically sane and responsible government, and you can demand that, but the only way to demand it is to stop caring about, stop with your political opinions. Your government should do this, government should do that. You have a government in Washington. You're either for it or against it, and saying it should do this, it should do that, is really rather beside the point when you have no power at all.
Since anyone with a good intuitive sense of history, which lots of people have, can sense the irresistible nature of the giant, grinding bulldozer that is the democratic movement, they respond intuitively with the natural human response corresponding to passivism, apathy. This behavior is also known as learned helplessness. Contrary to democratic dogma, learned helplessness is the normal human response to tyranny. It is almost always far more rational than resistance. And they do nothing. Politically, the Americans are the victim of a vicious cycle. They are apathetic because they are powerless, and powerless because they are apathetic. The political apathy of the modern American voter would amaze and terrify his great-grandfather. Which means for us, we all need waking up before we find ourselves sleepwalking into an authoritarian nightmare. You might be thinking, slow down a second. I've never heard of this Moldbug guy, or Speaker's Corner Ralph. Why the overreaction? Well, over a decade ago, when he was still writing his blog, even Moldbug recognized we were halfway between democracy and formalism, and repeated this opinion in this speech he gave.
And finally, we get to the rest of, I'm just going to go over this very briefly. What is a government? A government is just a corporation which owns a country. Nothing more, nothing less. And, if you think that corporations can own countries, you would be right, because that's what they are. It so happens that our sovereign corporation is very poorly managed. And there's a very simple way to replace that, which is what we do to all corporations that have failed. We simply delete them.
And today, neoreactionary ideology has infected the corridors of power around the world. The architect of Trump's election victory, Steve Bannon, he's big on neoreactionary thought, as is one of Trump's financiers, seen here cheerleading at one of his election rallies, Peter Thiel, co-founder of PayPal.
I'm Peter Thiel. I build companies and I support people who are building new things, from social networks to rocket ships. I'm not a politician, but neither is Donald Trump. He is a builder, and it's time to rebuild America.
Rumour has it, based on leaked emails, Moldbug has an open line to the White House, communicating with Bannon and his aides through an intermediary. With Moldbug explicitly admitting, in an email exchange shortly after the election, Yavin told Yiannopoulos that he had been coaching Thiel. Peter needs guidance on politics for sure, Yiannopoulos responded. Less than you might think, Yavin wrote back. I watched the election at his house. I think my hangover lasted into Tuesday. He's fully enlightened. Just plays it very carefully. Milo's emails are given credibility when it's known Thiel has invested over $1 million into Moldbug and his startups. Back here in the UK, Ralph has claimed Downing Street backseat driver Dominic Cummings as one of their own.
But he does subscribe. Dominic is very smart. He understands that he's going to have to fight us in the Nationalists. He understands, therefore, that the cutting-edge thinking politically must be neo-reactionary thinking. Dominic is not stupid. He's hiring smart people who understand neo-reactionary modeling and thinking, like moi, right? And obviously, List has picked up. They say Ralph is he's gonna make everyone go far right using accelerationism. And yes, I am. Yeah, so suck it up.
And with the BBC even describing Cummings' ideology as neo-reactionary in all but name.
What he actually wants to do is set up the Avengers. It's a curious, slightly juvenile, initially endearing but ultimately exasperating longing to get out of the structures of government that actually make a country run and have this kind of superpowered group that will make everything brilliant immediately.
It's no wonder this movement is trying to appeal to the geeks, those who might be frustrated with the current society, or those suffering from Stockholm Syndrome from early trauma. It gives them a leg up the ladder, the brains behind the already powerful brawn. Moldbug confirms this when writing, "The reaction demands balls and brains, prudence and pure craziness, both vast ambition and genuine humility." Cummings explicitly called out for those geeks when he uploaded a job advert onto his blog calling for an assortment of weirdos and misfits.
Even the may form a party will never get anywhere because Dominic Hardman is wasting a lot of money on super quant forecasting people who can think like me. Because ultimately the name of the game is for political power, you're going to have to do this digitally.
Yeah.
Cummings found one in Andrew Sabisky, who strongly believed to have neoreactionary beliefs due to his own online ramblings. Sabisky wrote that the Dark Enlightenment is a silly hyperbolic term for what should be fairly uncontroversial at this point. Ralph goes one step past neoreactionary thinking and also approves of and uses accelerationist tactics in order to achieve his neoreactionary reboot. I'm not going to get into accelerationism too much in this video. I want to keep it simple. One of the most prominent writers on accelerationism is Nick Land, and his blog is far from simple. What's important for now is that along with replacing our democracy with corporate overlords, Ralph also believes that massive reduction in population is necessary for world peace. You mean they care about world peace, I hear you ask? Yes, ordered world peace. But Ralph understands they might have to break a few eggs in the process.
And obviously as nationalists, it's a very exciting time for us. And this correlates perfectly with our anti-open borders message and our segregation messages. So yeah, we love it. We're already looking at ways to play with memes for Corona Nats and Corona nationalism. So we'll be releasing those soon enough, man. So
the deaths of thousands of people, and the main thing that you're thinking about is how you can use it for your political agenda.
Yeah, and I think Ralph admitted it now, which is, at least you're very honest about it. You know, you're going to use the deaths of people just to score some points against the left.
Well, it's just
It kind of says it all, doesn't it? I don't really need to say anything else.
Well, yeah.
The government's response to the pandemic makes a lot more sense seen through the eyes of a neoreactionary.
And I must level with you, level with the British public. More families, many more families, are going to lose loved ones before their time.
But it didn't have to be that way. Take Germany, for instance. They elected a scientist as chancellor. With that in mind, the amount of deaths in Germany due to the coronavirus speak for themselves. This pandemic isn't just great news for Ralph for propaganda purposes, but also for his desire to see world depopulation.
I don't think Tommy even knows who Ralph is, but
No,
I asked Ralph about accelerationism.
Yeah.
And he said, yes, he's an accelerationist. And then I asked him about population control. And he said to me that he wants to reduce the world's population to 500 million.
Okay.
Now, when I said this in the chat, people called me a liar. But on Content Over Everything stream yesterday, he made his position very clear that he wants to reduce the world's population. He made that very clear yesterday on that stream.
But you're willing to cull sub-Saharan Africans, presumably if they ain't Christian. I don't know if you're called the Christian ones as well.
Well, what do you mean?
You said when you was making your presentation for what was it?
I believe there's a population explosion.
You made a case for either recolonization because too many of them are going to come to the UK or to Europe, or a genetic cull to keep the numbers down.
Okay, so let me try to answer those. That is the world population estimate. We are heading and going to surpass 10 billion, right? By 2050, magic number. We're going to keep going up. Our environmental problems, our food problems, our war problems, our resource problems, all downstream from a population explosion. So I believe for us it is human and moral to manage our population. I want to see that population managed, or the maximum number of people will suffer. But when I mean a cull, I mean a population management strategy. I don't mean people running around killing little African babies or injecting people with things.
I think I'll be. I don't want to
Do
go
you
into
think
the
I
majority.
want
Obviously, the
content?
majority
Do you think
isn't
I want
always
to
right,
kill
but
black people?
My impression, yeah.
Do you think I want to kill black people? The answer is no.
But that's like I said, fam. I don't know how. Because if you did want to kill black people, what would you say? Wouldn't that suffice?
I'm the sort of guy who would tell you what I want to do. If you haven't learned one thing about me in phase 1 and year 1 of the corner, in phase 1, is I'm telling you exactly what I think. I wouldn't be worried about what you thought of me. But one way or the other, the cull is coming, right? Now, I don't want it to be an arbitrary call because we didn't manage the earth properly and we had environmental disaster after disaster. I would rather have it controlled.
Bottom line is, when I hear that, I think globalist. And I think New World Order.
So how did the Neoreactionaries take power? First, it seems Moldbug releases his inner psychopath. Today, you begin your irreversible descent into black, unthinkable madness. In retrospect, of course, the process will appear as it is, an ultimate ascent, out of the computer's infinite fluorescent maze, into the glorious air of pure, unfiltered reason. The last hatch is unlocked above your head, the ladder is at your feet, warm sunlight, green grass, and real reality. This alone is UR's program. Dare you continue? It is not too late to turn back. And then the reality. That said, let's jump right into the procedure. The procedure comes in 3 steps. Become worthy, accept power, rule. So how does one become worthy?
We're not worthy! We're not worthy! We're not worthy!
Well, according to a Neoreactionary, they should abide by the Thiel rule. The Thiel rule of pacifism is absolute renunciation of official power. We know instantly that any form of resistance to sovereignty, so long as it succeeds, is a share in power itself. Thus, absolute renunciation of power over the United States government implies absolute submission to the structure. The logic of the Thiel rule is simple. As a reactionary, you don't believe that political power is a human right. You will never convince anyone to adopt the same attitude without first adopting it yourself. Since you believe others should be willing to accept the rule of the new structure, over which they wield no power, you must be the first to make the great refusal. They must submit to the new, you must submit to the old. The United States government has the might, so it has the right. The pacifist does not rebel against the United States government because he has not the right to do so. He has not the right to do so because he has not the power to do so. This passage is a flashback to earlier, when Moldbug called for the audience to grow apathetic. He leads the politically induced sleepover from his blog with some weird anti-Gandhi cult-like behaviour, practically asking to be enslaved by his corporate overlords. But I guess it's alright when you're born with a silver spoon in your mouth, make millions in the dot-com bubble, and are then able to retire at about 30 years old to write a weird blog. When commenting on his own blog, and whether or not it's justifiable under neo-reactionary thought and the Thiel rule, Moldbug says this: the pacifist blog does not seek power by any means at all. Its activities are neither aggressive nor destructive, but constructive, ideally leading into a reaction centre, as we'll see later. Therefore, it is concerned not with the number of people who read it, but with the quality of people who read it. If it takes the next step and becomes a reaction centre, its construction workers must be found among this motley crew. And with the likes of Thiel providing a route from Moldbug to the White House, he's certainly attracted the Hollywood star-type quality of people reading it. It's Ralph's YouTube channel that has become his very own reaction centre, where he's able to find his own motley crew. But I cannot stress enough, the danger with Ralph and the neo-reactionary cult as a whole is not how big of a following they can muster, but how much discontent and apathy they can sow in the process. So what can reactionaries do now? Just write blogs? Moldbug earlier called for balls and brains, prudence and pure craziness. Everything that can be infiltrated should be infiltrated, of course. One way of increasing apathy is by polarizing society politically. Ralph aims to move the Overton window further right by infiltrating nationalist movements, dragging other influential figureheads with him as he slides down the pipeline at accelerating speeds. Ralph is the neo-reactionary organ grinder, and the far-right figureheads are his ivory keys.
All the different moments of the banter. I thought you were here to let the British people decide what they wanted to do, not what you wanted them to do. But here's the thing. That's it, isn't it? You say you're a servant, but you just said it yourself. What we want them to do. It's all about you, Ralph, and what you want. It's not what...
Ultimately, these Avengers want to make a mockery of the democratic system in order to inspire more apathy from voters to the point where we sleep. There will come a time when enough of us are either sleeping or distracted by the fight amongst ourselves that we won't even notice them hit the reboot switch. The people will have no choice but to accept that those who've built the most power in society now have the authority to rule as they please. Events leading up to this reboot could look something like this.
And the problem is, the sad thing is, it would be a white-on-white slaughter in the new 0.3, right? It would be the right going against the left. The non-whites would just be wiped out in the consequence of that war. But it would be a shame because it would just deplete the genetic stock, right? You saw what happened in World War II. You saw what happened in World War I.
There's one thing I do agree with Moldbug on. Our current version of democracy is completely broken. Currently, it is a self-serving institution where party politics are put before the true will of the people. And as inequality continues to grow, a world in which we crown the Silicon Valley tech geeks as kings becomes more likely. We need to modernize our democracy before this political sabotage by some of the richest in society accelerates to the predicted war to end all wars.
Everything and spin it. Yes, we divide to conquer in the right, but we don't divide to break things down. We divide so we break it down so we can reassemble it into a coherent whole. So division is a technique of accelerationism, but it's not accelerationism. Lister?
Just accept you're going to be subsumed, I'm afraid. That's all it is.
Bogified, indeed.
Like I suspect Dominic Cummings to be a neo-reactionary infiltrator to the Tory party, Ralph started his own process of infiltration through the Tommy Robinson movement.
This guy is further right than a fascist, self-proclaimed.
Oh, God,
these people don't think...
What can I say? God, green and
what's he doing here?
And then into the ethno-nationalist sphere, dragging as many of the Tommy Robinson figureheads to the right as he could. And now when the ethno-nats wake up, he's going to do exactly to your movement what he did to Tommy's. This is what neo-reactionary thought explicitly calls for. If the elites are already consolidating their wealth as they currently wield the power,
what is the system actually? And it includes a lot of things that are called NGOs, things that are called universities, things that are funded by the state. It's a very, very large system, and it all needs to be destroyed. And finally, you need a CEO, and a national CEO is what's called a dictator. It's the same thing. There's no difference between a CEO and a dictator. If Americans want to change their government, they're going to have to get over their dictator phobia. One way of dealing with that.
When somebody's the president of the United States, the authority is total. And that's the way it's got to be. The authority is total. It's total. And the governors know that.
Are you going to put your trust in Mark Collette to not bend the knee to the billionaire elite, just like Ralph and the rest of his neo-reactionary cult are doing?
What are you doing? Oh, no, I said no. No. So switch it off now. Switch it off. No, don't! I'm not going to go out. So it comes. You should have sent that booklet out, man. It's a fucking big... Nick Shaw asked me for it! Right, Annabelle. You do white fix treatment. I'm not saying else on camera. No, fucking hitting him. White. I'll tell you. Okay, I'll say it. Fucking all even in here then. Okay, no, I'll say anything.